All right, we're on the latest episode of Blood Money, and today I have a very special guest, Mr. Jeff Dornik. How are you doing, sir?
Doing very good. Doing very good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. I was on your show a little while back, man, and I just really impressed with what you've been working on, and getting this information out there. Let's start with a little bit about your background, your bio. What were you doing, and what were you planning in life before this kind of tyrannical catastrophe that we've seen in our country?
Yeah, I mean, it honestly, like my story has kind of been like a wild experience. So I actually went to college to study Christian ministries to focus on like youth ministry,
Hmm.
and then that was right around the time of the real estate crash of 2008. And I was out in Arizona, and I was in my junior year of college. And I realized, okay, so the real estate market crashed. I've got all these churches that are in the Arizona area, and I realized nobody's hiring youth pastors. Nobody's hiring worship pastors, which was the other side of church ministry that I had experience in, and so those were the two things that I was trained in that pastors wanted that churches wanted volunteers for. So the only thing that churches were hiring at the time was like senior pastors and maybe like an administrative person or something along those lines. And so I realized, okay, crap, like I'm spending all this money on college, going for Christian ministries for a career that's basically paying no money right now. Great. So then I ended up getting a job working with a startup company out in Arizona. Started off in customer service, moved over to sales. I basically had my hand in basically almost every aspect of this startup company, and it was a really good learning experience for me because then I learned, how do you launch a business? How do you run it? How do you fulfill? How do you deal with products? How do you deal with all that kind of stuff? And then from there, I jumped it around, did some freelance work, all of that. And then it came 2020, and I got a job working for a very prominent advertising agency out in New York. I was the VP of operations. I was able to work remotely. I live in communist California. They're in
Hmm.
communist New York, and so I started January of 2020 and was working with them. And then COVID hit, and they basically let everybody go except for people that were actively working on advertising campaigns. Well, I wasn't, on the advertising side of things, so they let me go. There was no point of having VP of operations if you can't even operate business
Yeah.
in New York. So that's when I was supposed to interview, and I remember this happened on March 17th. It was a day after my birthday, and I was supposed to interview this guy JD Rucker, and for my Christian podcast at the time. And then I
Mhm.
called him. I'm like, dude, I just got let go of my job. I got to figure some stuff out. Let's reschedule. So he immediately calls me and he's like, okay, I just want to throw this out there because he's like, I believe God works in very crazy, weird ways, and I don't believe that there's coincidences. So he's like, why don't we start working together? And I'm like, okay, what did you have in mind? And initially we were talking about maybe starting a super PAC, getting into
Mhm.
politics, because I understood the Christian world, but I hadn't really jumped into the politics side of things.
By the way,
And
you mentioned you had a Christian podcast. How
yeah,
long how long ago did you start that?
started that in 2017. I
Okay.
was actually I was actually working with Brandon Howes over at Worldview Weekend for a while. And I started my show over there, and then it started off as the Gatekeepers podcast, and that was just monologue. I would deal with current events happening within the church, and then I launched a show called Conversations with Jeff, which was just an interview show where I just literally just interviewed theologians, pastors, things along those lines, and it was really interesting, and I learned a lot, especially about podcasting and how to do interviews. I'd never done anything like that. I was always this quiet, shy, homeschool kid, growing up. I'd never done any of this kind of stuff.
Wow.
And so JD knew that I had this background in, podcasting. I had started the Gatekeepers, which was a podcasting network of other Christian shows. And he's like, well, what if we, instead of doing the pack thing, because neither one of us know multi millionaires that can support our pack, what if we start a podcast network dealing with politics and current events and all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff? Like, okay, cool. So we did that. We launched Freedom First Network, and I immediately reached out to a friend of mine who is now the co-host of our top show on the network, Two Mics.
Wow.
That's with Dr. Michael Scheuer and Colonel Mike. We basically helped launch their show, and now they're consistently in the top, like 100 shows on Apple Podcasts. They're phenomenal. Dr. Scheuer is a former CIA intelligence officer. His job actually was to track Osama bin Laden, and
Wow.
he would go into the White House, sit in the Oval Office, and tell Clinton and Bush and everybody, Osama's right here. We could take him out. Like, no, he's an asset. We can't do that. So he's got some crazy
Wow.
stories. But it was a crazy thing where we're trying to figure out, okay, so we've got this podcast network. How do we turn this into a business, right? Because the reality of it is that there's always the attacks against conservatives for being a patriot, PAY triot. It's like you're just a grifter
Yeah.
out for money. But in order to actually do this properly, where you have the time to actually investigate, to
Hmm.
conduct interviews, do this, you have to have an income. So we basically
Hmm.
threw a whole bunch of things against the wall to see what works, what sticks. Do we do a subscription model? Do we do advertising? Do we develop our own products? So we kind of did a bit of developing our own products and doing like affiliate marketing, and that's what stuck. And we've been able to build this thing and grow this thing to where now, we've got a great solid business. We've got a great group of guys that have shows in the network. And my job basically is, running this network is basically how can I facilitate to amplify voices that I think need to be heard, and also to help people to monetize. So that's basically been my focus for the last couple of years on this thing.
Wow, that's amazing. So, I mean, you go from being I mean, you're doing the podcasting, so you have experience in that, but you're
Yeah.
dealing mostly with Christian themed stuff. You're not going into politics, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about the transition of going from somebody that was into, Christian themed podcasts, all of a sudden talking about politics, talking about tyrants, talking about conspiracies. How did that happen, and when did that exactly happen?
Yeah, so luckily, one of the things that we were dealing with back in, between like 2018 and 2020 was this really big push within the evangelical church, the social justice crowd, the woke Christianity, all that kind of stuff. And so during that time, I actually put out 2 books where I brought together a bunch of different Christian leaders
Hmm.
to write about these social justice issues, because what was happening within the church specifically was you had these pastors that were combining like Bernie Sanders AOC type, rhetoric with biblical Christianity, and then
Yeah.
blending it together and making this mesh that was just horrific. And
Yeah.
so we put out a book called Social Injustice: Exposing the False Gospel of the Social Justice Movement. And we had great contributing authors, people like Brandon Howes, Dr. Andy Woods, Michael Massey wrote the foreword. It was phenomenal.
Hmm.
And that book did really well. But the thing is that then we launched over to the second book, which was the sequel that came out maybe 6 months, 8 months later, called Church and State: How the Left Used the Church to Conquer America.
Hmm.
That one took a more political approach, because what ended up happening is we saw the political activism that was happening within the church. And so what we did with social injustice, it was more on the theology.
Hmm.
Church and State was more on the strategy of infiltration. How we dissected how George Soros was
Hmm.
compromising groups like the Gospel Coalition, like the Southern Baptist Convention, how they were
Hmm.
actually infiltrating the seminaries with these woke leftist political ideologies and getting these professors in there to hijack the seminaries, because that was where they were training pastors to then go out and be political activists for the woke social justice leftist mob. And so
Wow.
we really exposed this. We had guys like Greg Locke write chapters. We had Denise McAllister, Dr. Michael Brown.
Hmm.
We put together a great book on that, but that began to take a more political side of things, because what we saw was this blending together of theology and politics. So then when I launched the Jeff Dornik Show with Freedom First Network, I started interviewing, politicians and, conservative thought leaders. And I realized a lot of this exact same things that we're dealing with now within politics was the same thing I was dealing with 2-3 years ago within the evangelical church.
Yeah.
So I started being able to bridge that gap.
Hmm.
And the more I research and the more I dive into this, the more I realize that the supposed conspiracy theories are actual legitimate conspiracies,
Yeah.
that are happening. And we saw
Could I
this
could
with.
I put up my
Go
hand
for it.
here real
Yeah,
quick? I
go
just
for it.
want to throw something in here because it's like the global conspiracy aspect of this. I don't think people realize, right? Because what strikes me in what you're saying is that at the same time that the church was being infiltrated, right? Probably a year or two before that, it was around 2016, 2017, where I saw the media being infiltrated. Like literally, this woke ideology came in overnight, and things like getting rid of experienced showrunners because they were either male, and frankly, they were going after some of the older females that were probably more conservative. All of a sudden there was like everybody was getting fired, right, being replaced by young people with purple hair, and I literally saw the networks I was working at. I probably shouldn't say their names, but there's like 3 of them that where I saw this happen right in front of my eyes, where this change then caused, go woke, go broke. It was a disaster. Now, to add to that, I've talked to judges who around the same time were dismissed because essentially they were white males and they were taken out of office. So it's interesting how this all of it happened within like a 3-4 year period across multiple industries.
Yeah, well, and I think specifically, what I was dealing with within the evangelical church, we saw a lot of the same kind of things. We saw seminary professors get kicked out for saying, like, some things that went against woke narratives, or whatever. Like, I think it was at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. The seminary, the president of the seminary was actually ousted, for a supposed Me Too accusation in the midst of all the Me Too stuff that ended up being absolutely ridiculous, and it was just a bunch of leftists trying to get rid of this old school prominent conservative leader, and then they replaced him with a complete woke leftist social justice warrior of a leader taking over the Southwest Baptist Theological Seminary. So we saw a lot of the same strategies happening, but I think that the really important thing that we've got to understand is that this has been a systematic strategy to conquer this country that's been going on for 50 years or more.
Mm-hmm.
They systematically took over every aspect of our society where they could have influence over our thoughts and minds. There's a reason why the CIA went to Hollywood and set up shop there, and they
Mm-hmm.
began to control the narratives that was happening in our film, in our music, in our TV shows. It was to be able to push certain narratives and certain propaganda that they wanted pushed. There's a reason why they systematically took over our universities, why they took over our education system, why they took over the publishing, why they took over, any sense of influence, any institution of influence, they systematically took over. And the last one that they were not able to actually conquer for the longest time was the evangelical church. In my opinion, that was the final straw. That was the last stand. And they did that by hijacking the seminaries and then
Mm-hmm.
flipping certain prominent evangelical leaders. And I'll name some names as well. If you look up somebody like an Al Mohler is one of the leaders in the Southern Baptist Convention. For the longest time, he was seen as this conservative, prominent Christian leader. He was the one that like CNN would call to be the conservative voice to go against whatever their narrative. And all of a sudden, he starts adopting a lot of these woke, critical race theory and LGBTQ issues and things along those lines. And a lot of his guys were pushing, promoting a lot of these transgender LGBTQ issues within the evangelical church, which is mind-boggling. Then you
Mm-hmm.
got somebody like a John Piper, who's world famous. A lot of Christians love this guy, and he's been seen as this reformed, conservative, principled Christian. But then what he's doing is he's embracing Black Lives Matter and actually saying that the Second Amendment should be abolished and no Christian should ever own a firearm. And you're just sitting here and like, when did this happen? And why
Yeah.
did this all happen between 2015 and 2018? Like there's this consistent thing going on, and
Yeah,
there's
this
there
is what I was trying to get at. For anybody that doesn't think there's these elite that are literally pulling the strings with timing and
yep.
precision. I mean, this happened, and you look at our courts. Sorry to interrupt you, Jeff,
No, go
but
for it.
you look at our courts right now. It's these woke activist judges, and it's funny. I was talking to Joey Gilbert the other day, and he was complaining about how 3 years ago it feels like the world in the judicial circle started to fall apart because he's like, I was kicking ass until 3 years ago, and the judges were respecting the Constitution and the laws that are in the books. He's like, right around 3 years ago, all of a sudden, cases that were clearly constitutional were getting dismissed for no logical reason, for complete BS, for statutory laws that they're putting, before the Constitution, which is not the way you got to, because the Constitution is supposed to be supreme, right? And so he noticed this clear change, and lo and behold, you look at what happened with essentially these white male judges being dismissed because they were white males, or being taken out of the judge's seat because they're white males, and then being replaced by essentially woke activist judges. And I mean, I just don't know how a country could function. And obviously that's the purpose of all of this, is to make sure everything collapses when
Yeah.
your most important systems are no longer functioning.
Well, I mean, and even I would say it even goes beyond just the white male judges. I mean, look at what they're doing with Clarence Thomas right now in the Supreme
Hmm.
Court. It's just a smear campaign that unlike anything that we've seen on that level.
Hmm.
But really, what they will do is they will systematically destroy you if you stand in their way. And one of the interesting things that we've learned, that I've learned dealing with stuff both in the political world and in the Christian world, is that if you're supposed to be on the left and you're not, or you walk away, they will literally do whatever they have to do in order to destroy you, right?
It's like the
So
mob.
yeah. Well, I mean, when you think about it, Clarence Thomas, he's a black Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
According to the left's ideology, he should be a leftist, but he's
Hmm.
not. He's a conservative. So they're going to do whatever they can to destroy him. A good friend of mine, Bobby Lopez, he hosts a show, the Big Brown Gadfly, on our podcast network.
Hmm.
He's Latino, right? He
Hmm.
was a professor at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's he's
Hmm.
he's formerly gay, became
Hmm.
a Christian, repented. Now he actually speaks out about a lot of the sex abuse that happens within the gay community, even within the evangelical world and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Well, he's somebody, Latino, formerly gay. Everybody thinks he should be this leftist, right? But then
Yeah.
he comes out as this prominent conservative voice within the Southern Baptist movement. He gets canceled for
Hmm.
telling his story of how Jesus Christ came into his life and transformed his life and took him out of this gay lifestyle where there was massive amounts of just abuse and just horrific things in all that. And then
Yeah.
he becomes a Christian, now married with multiple kids, a great family, all this kind of stuff. He was fired for literally taking interviews and sharing his story. Like,
Yeah.
they will do whatever they can to control the narrative. And if you're supposed to be on the left, they will just systematically destroy you.
Yeah, yeah, and then you have guys like you that like rise up to. I mean, tell me about that journey. I mean, I'm sure it was a little bit out of your comfort zone to go out there and be like, I'm going to take on the tyrants of this world by revealing information that the mainstream media doesn't want us to know.
Well, so again, it's very strange. I'll take it back to the evangelical side of things first, because this is
Mhm,
where I really learned. Number one, you have to have thick skin,
mhm,
and number two, you have to be willing to follow the truth wherever it leads. In it, even if that means that people will set out to destroy you. So one of the things that got me started in all of this was I started critiquing this guy named Pastor John MacArthur. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's out here in California, has a
mhm.
big church
Oh,
up in Sun Valley.
yeah.
And so I was actually practically born into his church when I was a little kid. We went to his church. I grew up basically in a family that was diehard Pastor John MacArthur.
Mhm,
Now that I'm looking, it's almost cult like, right? It's like, well, John MacArthur says that
yeah,
X, Y, and Z, and you don't think so. You're clearly a heretic.
yeah.
And so there became this debate over interfaith dialogues, and this is all a long story, but I'm shortening it. There's this thing about interfaith dialogues where there was one theologian, Dr. James White, was sitting down with a Muslim imam, and they were trying to find the commonalities between Islam and Christianity. I took the position that there are no commonalities. They're a completely different religion. They worship a different God, whereas they were kind of saying, no, it's kind of the same God. We just believe differently about him and all this kind of stuff. Well, John MacArthur historically had always opposed interfaith dialogues until it was James White doing it, and James White, hey, it's a friend of MacArthur. So all of a sudden he changes his tune, and I'm literally this guy on Twitter with 50 followers, no
Mhm.
followers, and I start questioning, why are you changing your position? Like what's going on here? And all of a sudden MacArthur's right hand henchman comes out, and he just systematically sets out to destroy me. Over the
Wow.
course of that next year, I had been stalked by a member of Grace Community Church. Literally, they were going to places, posting on an anonymous account, took pictures of where I was the following day to where they could show they knew where I was, they knew where I was going. It was
Wow.
crazy. All
They
over
they went they went like full Scientology on you. That's the
yes.
stories I've heard of people that leave the church with Scientology.
Yes, exactly. And really what was wild about this is all over a theological debate over interfaith dialogues, and all of a sudden I'm getting stalked. Well, I ended up talking to a LAPD police detective, right? A Los Angeles police detective, who she told me that she's like, this is a cult, right? she's like, what ends up happening, they're actually participating in criminal behavior, both financially.
Mm.
There's accusations of sex trafficking. There's sex rings going on within there. There's abuse going on. There's all this kind of stuff. They're covering it up. How are they covering up? She said that I would go in and investigate
Hmm.
Grace Community Church for all these crimes, and every time I would get close, there was somebody from the church that was in the LAPD that would shut down the investigation every single time.
Wow, wow,
She's
wow.
like, this is dangerous territory, and this is a prominent evangelical leader. This is a pastor that Jenna Ellis was actually defending against Gavin Newsom and actually giving a legal advice to, and actually representing them in their lawsuit against the state of
Wow.
California. This is a prominent guy, and this LAPD police detective actually told me, no, this is actually a criminal investigation. As I was watching Leah Remini's documentary series on Scientology, where she talks about all these different people, interviewing them on leaving Scientology,
Mhm.
there were so many times I paused and I looked at my wife and I'm like, this is the exact same thing that was happening
Exact
in
same thing.
John
Exact same
MacArthur's
thing.
church,
And so
which they,
sorry, one quick thing, by the way. This
yeah.
story you're saying is like so widespread, by the way. And I won't get into details, but we've done quite a number of interviews where we hear about churches tied to certain big politicians in Washington, D.C., in Mexico, for example, same sort of thing. But it is a lot more widespread than I think people understand.
Well, here's the thing, and this leads me into this book that I'm currently writing.
Mhm.
It's called Following the Leader, and which you guys can actually pre-order if you want to. It'll be out by the end of the year. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at a lot of these. What I'm arguing is that the intelligence agencies like the CIA, NSA, all these different intelligence agencies, I believe that they were actually using cults and religious groups in order to test their brainwashing and propaganda techniques.
Wow.
And so you see connections between people like Jim Jones and the CIA. You see connections between Scientology and the intelligence agencies. You see, I've been hearing rumors, and I'm looking at it as well, that there's ties between John MacArthur and the intelligence agencies. There's ties between evangelical groups
Well,
and,
you would. Sorry about John MacArthur. You would think. I mean, I've seen quite a number of movies where, with the sort of thing you're talking about, real. I mean, movies based upon real
yep.
life events, where the sort of thing you're talking about, where there's an investigation, you gather a bunch of information, and then always at the last minute, there's somebody that's putting a block to it. I mean, that's classic intelligence right there.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So as I'm looking at this, I'm like, what's the significance of this, right? Like, why are they doing this? Well, I believe that they're using this in order to see how can we manipulate people, and I think what they realize is they need a cult leader, right? That you need a leader that people will follow and follow blindly, and I think that now we're seeing that play out ever since 2019 until now, to where if you look at the way big tech is working, the mainstream media, politics, religion, everything, what they do is they try to push you towards a leader in order for you to follow, whether it's
Mhm.
Fauci, whether it's
Big time.
Donald Trump,
Big time.
whether it's Joe Biden, whoever it is,
Mhm.
and you're supposed to just fall in line. You no longer have principles. Now you are a part of a team. You are a follower. You are a
Mhm.
sheeple of a particular political leader or religious leader or any kind of leader that you can think of, and then you are supposed to fall into line with whatever they say under loyalty or
Mhm.
whatever thing
Mhm.
that they want to say.
Yeah.
And
Which, by the way, this is something we realized in the freedom movement too. I won't give any names so we don't get off topic here, but like this idea of putting a star out there, celebrity out
yep,
there, this is something that's been perfected. And you think about, look, these celebrities, I mean, let's be real, like a lot of them come from traumatized backgrounds. Part of the reason why people want to be celebrities, and you could read about the psychology of celebrity and all of that, is because they're trying to be something. They're trying to get their name in lights, right? And that's not like how every single person is, because there are true artists, right? But if you look at the essence of that, that's the easiest person to capture and control. And it's funny how that seems to be in every case where they've taken the power out of people, and you see people blindly following these individuals, thinking that these individuals are going to be the knights in shining armor, that they're going to save everything, as opposed to taking control of their lives and the fate of this country, frankly, by actually doing something. So yes, I totally understand how that psychology plays into their hand, because you disempower the people and you have essentially a CIA puppet that's not going to do much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And the thing is that we see this playing out within the political world as well. I mean, you've got somebody like a Donald Trump, right? And I'm not saying that he's controlled by the CIA, but we're seeing a lot
Mhm,
of the same tactics that's at play here, where you've got somebody like him, where he's out there legitimately pushing. What I refer to as the bioweapon injections, poison death shots,
mhm,
COVID jabs. He's actively pushing that, and you've got all of these people that are anti-vaccine, that are either making excuses for him or
mhm.
supporting him or whatever that might be. And you're just sitting here and you're like, what happened to just sitting back, having your principles, calling balls and strikes, and then just voting for whichever candidate is
Mhm.
is most closely aligned? That might be Donald Trump, that might be somebody else. I don't know. But what
Yeah.
happened to being principled first? And every single time I bring up the question, when is Donald Trump going to change his tune on the COVID jabs? Because
That is that
that
is
is a
the
major
big
concern.
topic. Yeah, like, I mean, is that a deal breaker for you? The fact that, I was actually just writing a note about Donald Trump here, but, how could I don't know, how can we look at him and say that he's not controlled opposition when he's pushing something, or he was pushing something that's clearly a death jab?
Well, so there's lots of different ways to look at this. One could be that he's controlled opposition, which I think that there is a real possibility that that could be the case. But then again, is everybody controlled opposition? When you think about it, I mean, I don't
Mhm.
trust Ron DeSantis.
Oh,
That's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
so I mean, who would be the person that would not be controlled opposition? Maybe an RFK, but then I disagree with them on climate issues. I disagree with them on the role of the government. I
Mhm.
disagree with him on all these different issues, but he's right when it comes to the COVID jabs, and he's right when it comes to the deep state and the NSA and the CIA and all that kind of stuff. So I think that what we have to do is I think we have to call balls and strikes. We have to say, look, Trump, you're dead wrong when it comes to the COVID jabs. And I think we need to have that conversation, and that a lot of people are just refusing to have. I think that
Mhm.
with Donald Trump, we need to have the conversation. Look, you raised $250 million to fight election fraud and actually overturn the election. What did you do with that money? I haven't
Yeah,
seen that
yeah,
money spent. Where did that money go?
yeah.
There's some legitimate questions that I think we need to have. And I think it's strategically better, if you're a Trump supporter, to have that conversation now than in the midst of the campaign.
Yeah.
And
I
everybody's
wanna throw
refusing to
one
have
thing
that
here about
conversation.
I
Yeah.
wanna throw the one thing here about the fundraising, because the geography of fundraising, meaning that when somebody like a Donald Trump raises $250 million, he's basically covering most of the money that people could actually throw at something like
Yeah.
this, right? Which I've heard that's part of the technique, that these organizations pop up, celebrities pop up, that really take so much of the public funds due to donation being a centerpiece, that now really the movement suffers when that person is either controlled opposition or has nefarious ideas about what to do with that money. So I'm not saying Donald Trump is like part of this big conspiracy. It does concern me that he's raised so much money for elections, hasn't done anything, and this jab, I mean, how does he go up against somebody like an RFK when that guy is talking the truth about the jab and still continue to not reveal that this thing is actually a death jab?
Yeah, well, so the problem with Trump is that either he's controlled opposition, and again, I don't know, that's the thing, I don't know, is he controlled opposition, or understanding his personality, he just doesn't want to admit that he's wrong,
Yeah.
right? So there can be that side of it as well, and I think from a strategic standpoint, he was trying to take away Joe Biden's claim that, look, I'm the one that rolled out the vaccine, and he's trying to make that appeal to the moderate Republicans that are still pro-vaccine,
Hmm.
and the independents and things like that. The problem is that it's just not based in reality.
Yeah.
Like we know statistically that the COVID jabs do not do any positive. It doesn't stop you from contracting
Hmm.
COVID, spreading COVID, getting seriously ill, going to the hospital, or dying. In fact, it makes it more likely that you experience any of those. And on top of that, it's causing injuries, disabilities, and death, and
Hmm.
even their ability to control you from within. So when you actually look at this, there is no positive. By
Yeah.
definition, according to the United States Code, that is a bioweapon that
By the
needs
way,
to be
yep.
taken off the it needs to be taken off of the market immediately. And
Yeah.
the fact, this is one of my biggest concerns with Trump, and a lot of people like, Jeff, all you focus on is the vaccines and the COVID jabs and all that. But here's the thing: if Donald Trump can't admit that he was wrong, and he can't change course,
Hmm.
how can I trust and believe that he's going to change course on anything else? How
Yeah.
can I trust and believe that he's learned his lesson, that he needs to stop trusting the wrong people, that he needs to stop trusting the established Republican crowd, that he needs to stop trusting the Anthony Fauci's and these globalists? If he can't change course on the COVID jabs, How can I trust that he's going to change course on anything else that he did wrong during his presidency? And again,
Yeah.
I'll preface that by saying Donald Trump, greatest president of my lifetime. In my opinion, he did more for this country than any other president that I can think of in modern history. At the same time, he has some serious flaws that need to be dealt with heading into the 2024 election. Even with the flaws, he may be the best candidate for the job, but I hope that he'll change course on it.
I mean, and you wonder, like, when you look at something like the Tucker Carlson firing, again, you got to look at this kind of like from the bird's eye view, right? How we're talking about all these industries at the same time in that same bubble of time, essentially going woke and people being bought out and replaced in order to really affect the agenda that they have for this entire country. But then you look at the bird's eye view and you see these attacks of pro-Trump type people, right? Where their lives are literally attacked, like Tucker Carlson being one, where, I think the primary reason why they don't want Tucker Carlson out there is because he's a mouthpiece for Donald Trump, and his audience, 3.5 million, plus the residue effect of that message. Looking at, people like Andrew Tate, frankly, part of his message is similar in terms of, empowerment and, the government and all that stuff. They go after him. Now, whether you feel, good or bad about Andrew Tate, the fact is they started going after him without actually having a full case, which is kind of like what they're doing with the hunting down Donald Trump. The Giulianis, I mean, pretty much they go after anybody that is pro-Trump. So does that indicate that regardless of our questions about Donald Trump with the jab and all that, he is still such a threat to this establishment that they will try to get rid of him at all costs, including, trying to take him out, with nefarious methods like killing him,
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways to look at it. So like I think that the reason why Tucker Carlson was taken out, and Andrew Tate, and a lot of these, like you said, Giuliani, it's not because necessarily they were Trump supporters. It's because they were exposing the truth.
Tina Peters too, by the way. We should mention Tina Peters. We just did a short little doc on her about the persecution of Tina Peters. I know there's a ton of names, and it's like they don't all come to me. But yeah, it's
yeah, absolutely. But I think it's because they were exposed, because there's a lot of Trump supporters that have not been taken out, right? Mm-hmm. And so why were these other Trump supporters not being taken out, but these particular ones were? I think it's less about their support of Donald Trump and more about the fact that they were getting way too close to the truth. And I think that's why they're going after Trump. I don't think it's necessarily that they're scared of Trump in and of himself, but it's that Trump actually knows the truth on particular issues mm-hmm. that would expose their entire corrupt system. Because again, mm-hmm. like you always said, he used to be a part of the corrupt system. He used to pay off politicians. Yeah. He used to do the whole thing, right? And then once he became president, then he saw what was really going on. Now here's a crazy conspiracy that actually shows that Trump may have actually been, much more in the know than I think most people even realized. Are you familiar with the whole Ghislaine Maxwell tie to the Mar-a-Lago raid?
No, I'm not actually. No. Wow.
So okay, so this is a wild story, and I was talking with J.D. Rucker when he wrote about this. He was one of the first people to write about this, but he's like, this is one of those conspiracy theories that sounds crazy, but he's like, I can't, like, it makes such perfect sense. He's like, I'm actually quite believing this, right? Mm-hmm. So Ghislaine Maxwell, this was before the Mar-a-Lago raids. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. She's given her first interview. After her court case, right? And so she's in there, she's like, in her prison cell and all that, and she's explaining like what it's like in prison. She's it's like, here's the conditions, here's what's going on, and then she starts talking crazy talk, right? Like out of nowhere, which again is a very typical strategy. If you're trying to communicate with the intelligence agencies, what you do is you say something so absurd, so over the top, it doesn't make sense in and of itself, but they understand what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So she starts saying that all of a sudden there's these crazy things happening in her jail cell, like lights are turning on and off, toilets are flushing out of nowhere, like she's nowhere near the toilet, and the toilet like all this stuff, and she keeps blaming it on what's considered this person called A-17. And a lot of people thought, okay, maybe it's another cell. Maybe she's saying that this person's messing with her or whatever it is. But she kept saying she didn't say A-17. She kept saying A-17 is doing this. A-17 is turning the lights on and off and whatever. She starts talking all this crazy talk. Mm-hmm. Well, Then a couple months later, then the Mar-a-Lago raid happens, where the FBI goes in, they take all stuff out of Trump's office and all that.
Mhm.
Well, it turns out that if you look at the list of the things that they actually took, there was a
Mhm.
box that was labeled A-17 that
Wow.
was in there. And so there's a lot of belief that Donald Trump actually had the evidence about the ties between the intelligence agencies and Jeffrey Epstein, that they were actually using him to compromise the world leaders by having to do the horrific things on the island. And basically the belief was that she was signifying to the FBI, this is what you need to look for, because
Wow.
this is the documentation that you need. And so she was trying to play nice with the intelligence agencies.
Wow, wow. And so they took that, now they have it in their possession theoretically if
Yep,
this is true.
exactly.
Wow. I mean, why doesn't I mean, if somebody like Donald Trump that actually has all that evidence, why doesn't he just why hold it long enough to give him the opportunity to take it back? I mean, I know we're speculating
Leverage.
here.
Honestly, it would be for leverage. It would
Mhm.
be because if you just come out with it, yes, you're exposing it, and as a principled conservative, whatever it is, for me, it'd be like, no,
Mhm.
just come out with it. Like, we need to expose
Yeah.
this whole thing. We're running out of time. We're going over the cliff. Stop holding on to it. But from a political standpoint, and from let's say like a Donald Trump standpoint, he's using it for leverage. He's probably using it in order to either hold off on their prosecutions, their persecutions on him, and like, look, I've got the files.
Mhm.
I'll come out with it if you do this. So then they take that out, and then all of a sudden, after they do the Mar-a-Lago raid, they take that box labeled A-17.
Mhm.
That's when all the persecution has happened since then. Look at the floodgate of lawsuits that's been happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Look at all the different things that have happened since that Mar-a-Lago raid. I wonder, and again, this is just theoretical. I can't prove it, but it's just,
Mhm.
my opinion. Looking at this, you're like, if all of a sudden the intelligence agencies and the FBI during their raid, now all of a sudden they have the documentation that
Mhm.
Donald Trump was using as leverage to hold them back. Now they have free reign to do whatever they want. When you think
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit, but it's also it's such a, in my opinion, it's such a flawed logic because if you have that kind of the leverage thing is basically the game they play, right?
yeah,
It's like they had dirt on all these politicians for a real long time. You look at the paintings, in Jeffrey Epstein's apartment. I mean, if those aren't extortion right there with George Bush flying buildings or planes into the buildings and
yeah,
stuff, and then you have Bill Clinton with like the Monica Lewinsky dress. If I was a gangster, those are the images I would put on my walls to make sure those people know I control them. And if you look at that logic, playing their game of, essentially having information leverage, it seems like a bad idea, but I don't know. This is all speculation. We don't know if this is what really happened, but you're right. There are a lot of coincidences there that, call into question what happened.
yeah. Well, yeah, and I think the reality of it is that if you look at Donald Trump, since he announced that he was running for president, what he did, especially back in 2015 and 2016, is he used the left's tactics against them. Right?
Mhm.
Everything from historically Republicans always took the high road. They never responded with the personal insults like the way that the left always hurls them. I mean, look at Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney
Yeah.
lost because he refused to retaliate to the ridiculous things that were being said about him. And then
Yeah.
Donald Trump's like, well, screw that. I'm gonna take the whole system on. I'll just call everybody names, do the personal attacks, which is something that Republicans typically did not want to do up until that point. And so when you think about it, Donald Trump always used the leftist tactics against them, which
Yeah.
was one of the things that actually attracted a lot of people to him. Finally, we've got a fighter. Finally, we've got somebody that's going to throw this right back in their face. The problem is that for the Donald Trump's practically his entire adult life he's been a Democrat. He's been in the swamp, and so
Mhm.
I think to a certain degree he may be taking this too far of using their tactics, because that's what he's been in and around his entire
Yeah.
life. And he may be taking it too far, but it's so inundated into his mentality that might be one of the major hiccups of a Donald Trump.
Yeah, 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 totally. Jeff, this has really been awesome. I think the thing that really just kind of was amazing information is what they're doing at churches, because we haven't had necessarily an interview that talks about how the churches were taken over, or at least the attempt to taking over the churches. Is that like where is that right now? I mean, is it still in disarray, or is it fixing itself? Are people taking action to help the churches fix themselves?
Not, I mean, honestly, not really. I mean, I mean, like for the long, I live out here in communist California. It was very difficult for us to find a good church out here, and we
Wow.
finally found a solid Bible teaching church. And then all of a sudden, 2019, 2020 hit, and all of a sudden they're talking about, like, Black Lives Matter, and we're no longer going to hold church services anymore because of COVID. And then even after Gavin Newsom allowed churches to start holding services again, our church went so far as to say we're going to wait an extra month to allow people to get vaccinated, so that way everybody can be protected when they actually do come back. And we're like, yeah, this is getting ridiculous. And then they actually held a service where they're like, we're a majority white church, and so
Hmm.
we're gonna bring in a black person, so that way we can all just sit and listen and learn what it's like to be a black person in America. And I'm like, I'm not going to allow my wife and then now my kid to be influenced and controlled by this kind of like leftist ideology. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
so we stepped away. Now we're going to a different church. But the reality of it is that this has overtaken the vast majority of churches in this country. And for anybody who's you're going to church, you're a Christian. What I always tell people: if you want to know whether your pastor is compromised,
hmm,
there's something very simple you can do. Look at who your pastor is quoting in his sermons, because that will tell you everything you need to know about his ideology. Because
yeah,
sometimes it's very difficult to tell, because they're kind of hiding it and cloaking a lot of their leftist talking points. But if they're quoting John Piper or
yeah,
Tim Keller or Rick Warren or any of these guys, I'm pretty sure that they're a leftist. They're a
hmm,
closeted leftist, and
yeah,
you can tell as soon as they quote a Tim Keller guy, a Tim Keller quote. You're gonna be like, okay, I need to either go have a conversation with our pastor, or I need to find a new church, because they're
mm,
clearly being influenced by the wrong people. And these guys have such widespread influence over so many pastors and so many churches. I mean, they hold pastors' conferences in arenas with only pastors to hear somebody like a Tim Keller, 10,000, 15,000 pastors. Think about the influence that one guy has
hmm,
over. If you have 15,000 pastors, let's say the church is sending two pastors per church, that's 7,500 churches now being influenced in one event by one guy that's a leftist in Tim Keller. So
yeah.
look at who your pastor's quoting. Go do research on that person that's being quoted. That will tell you everything you need to know about who your pastor is.
Exactly, exactly. Jeff, this will probably be my last big question, right? You interview tons of people. You're always talking to people. You got a lot of information coming towards you, right? What's your best future prediction of where this is going? Like, what do you think is going to happen in the next few years to this country? Where do you think the few, what happens in our future?
So if we continue down the trajectory that we're heading, I mean, we are heading towards the Great Reset, which is essentially the attempt to establish the New World Order, the attempt to establish the Antichrist reign that's predicted in the Book of Revelation in the Bible.
Mhm.
That's the direction that we're heading. I mean, the Bible talks about they're going to be going towards a one world government, a one world
Yeah,
currency, a one world religion. Like the Bible predicts this. That's exactly what they're trying to implement. Now the
yeah.
question is this actually the time? Because if you look at the world's history, Satan has been trying to establish this one world government and one world currency since the beginning of time. He tried it with the
Mhm.
Roman Empire. He tried it with the British Empire. You look at every single empire, and you can actually, and this is another crazy conspiracy theory, but you can actually see the magi, the magi that were there at the birth of Christ.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
were actually the kingmakers. That was the significance of them showing up at Christ's birth, is that God said, look, you guys are these kind of like New World Order, people, astrologists, you guys are the kingmakers, but
Mhm,
I'm going to use you to signify that this is the actual king of this world, that
mhm.
Jesus is the actual king of the world. That was the significance, because you can see the same magi were there in the book of Daniel in
Mhm.
Babylon. They were the ones that set up the king of Babylon. They were the ones that were there in Egypt with Moses behind the pharaohs. They were the one that established the pharaohs. They went to China when China became a superpower. You saw them with Nazi Germany when
Wow.
Nazi Germany was trying to conquer the world. You saw them with England when England practically conquered the entire world. These same people that are pushing the exact same agenda have been trying to accomplish this since the beginning of time. And then
Mhm.
they would get very close. You look at every empire, they almost conquered the world. And then God said, yeah, you know what? It's not time yet.
Yeah.
I'm going to allow you to implode. And
Hmm.
guess what? You guys can try again in a different way. Now, the significance of what's going on right now, this is the first time where they didn't try to conquer the world with one nation, right? Think about Nazi Germany. They tried to
Yeah.
conquer the entire world by dominating the world. This time, they're trying to conquer the world from within. From within all of these different political systems, through things like the World Economic Forum, through things like the United Nations, by compromising our leaders in both in our country and all the rest of the countries around the world, and trying to bring everybody together in order to essentially establish that one world government, one world currency. And
Hmm.
if we continue down this path, that's where we're heading. Now, I don't know. Is this time to establish the Antichrist reign? I have no idea. Only God knows. And so they're going to get close, and we're approaching that point of no return, to where God's either going to say, yeah, you know what, it's time, or sorry, it's not time. I'm going to allow it to implode, and you can try again. As time is going on, it's looking more and more bleak. But here's the thing: there's enough people that understand the truth about what's going on, that are
Hmm.
not getting hoodwinked around the world. I mean, look at the massive protests that are happening around the world against this tyranny that's going on.
Yeah. Like France, for example.
Yeah, the Bible says that the Antichrist will be so deceptive that he will even be able to deceive the elect, which means that the Christians and the believers.
Mm.
So I don't see that happening in the current landscape. I don't see the people like you and I getting
Mhm.
hoodwinked into buying into a one world government, right?
But is that, I mean, okay, is that because 99.5% probably of the church has been hoodwinked at that? I mean, people like you and I, in terms of the church, are not like, is there a lot of us, or I don't
So
know?
so there's not very many pastors.
Okay.
There's a lot of everyday lay people. So the thing that I've realized talking to people, it's the pastors that are being compromised.
Hmm.
It's the everyday churchgoer that is like, something doesn't sit right with me.
Mm.
Like what's going on here? And so when you're looking at this, I mean, I would argue that a significant portion of America, I don't know if it's a majority or not, but I would tend to believe it's a majority, would not go along with a one world government system.
Mm.
And so I think, as long as we will be obedient, as long as we will continue exposing the truth, I believe that God can, and he has historically worked through those that are being obedient in order to thwart those plans. And I believe that that's why we have to keep fighting. We
Hmm.
have to keep exposing. We have to keep running for office and getting involved in our local politics, and continue to expose the truth about what's going on, because that will be how God actually thwarts their plans. If God says, yeah, you know what? It's not time yet. Nobody knows. So I'm going to move on as if it's not time. And then, hey, if it is time, God's going to rapture us away, take away the believers, take away the
Yeah.
elect, and then the rest of the world will go to crap. But my job, and your job, and everybody's job that's watching this, is to be obedient and continue moving forward as if we will win this thing.
Yeah.
Because as long as we're obedient, God can work through us, even in impossible situations, in order to thwart their plans.
Yep, yep, yep. Jeff, this is amazing. And by the way, what's really cool about this is, we have kind of like what somebody on the outside would be like competing, networks or
Yeah.
whatever. And frankly, personally, I don't give a shit, because this is the important thing we're doing here is we're getting this information out, and really, we got to support other people that are doing the same. To me, the biggest concern, and to our company, the biggest concern is, it's amazing doing stuff like this and having the camaraderie, brotherhood of, like, putting this information out there. But how do we get more bees to the honey? That's always been the trick. How do we convert the people that are on the edge, and more importantly, how do we take some of the people that are, maybe questioning things, but they're still, brainwashed by the whole leftist mentality, and bring them to our side?
Well, see, and that's the difficult part, because the big tech companies have put us into these little algorithmic bubbles, is what I always refer to them as. Is that
Yeah.
even if you're allowed on Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, you're just preaching to the choir constantly. And then if you got kicked off like I was for a couple of years, you go over to Getter, you go over to Gab, you go over to these other places, and you're just preaching to the choir. And
Hmm.
and I've talked to Mindy Robinson about this all the time. We'll text, and we try to figure. And she made the point to me one time. She's like, I feel like we're constantly talking to people that agree with us. How do we get the everyday person to actually hear what we're saying? She's like, what do I have to do? Rent a plane and go drop
Yeah,
flyers
yeah.
out over Los Angeles? And when you think about it, that's the problem. And so, somebody
Mhm.
has got to come up with a solution to all of this to bypass the big tech censorship. I'm actually starting a tech company. I'm going to be coming out with my solution for that. But the reality of it is that we have to realize that if we're going to create solutions, it can't just be another place for conservatives. It can't just be
Mhm.
another Getter. Can't just be another Gab where we're just preaching to the choir.
Mhm.
We've got to be able to create something that will compete with big tech, and in the sense of compete for bringing people over because the technology there is comparable, or it's something new, it's something unique, it's
Mhm.
something that will attract them over. Nobody who's not a conservative is going to go on to Getter or
Mhm.
onto Truth Social or onto Gab, because all they are copycats
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Twitter and Facebook. They don't
It's
actually offer.
terrible, it's terrible. Just even that picture of we've been severed from communication with
Yeah.
one another. Therefore, like a random person doesn't have the choice of looking at it, some memes about leftist ideology and some memes about conservative ideology, making their own choice. I mean, that is just absolutely pathetic, and it's tyranny at its
Yeah.
max.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so if we're going to come out with solutions, it can't just be another place for conservatives. It's got to be somewhere for anybody and everybody with technology that is superior and will actually confront the big tech's grasp and hold
Mhm.
over the talking points and the narratives and all that kind of stuff. So I'm working on my solution that I'm actually going to be announcing at a Clay Clark's Reawaken America tour in Miami next week.
Mhm.
But we need more people thinking like that on how can we actually take on big tech, not just provide an alternative for what I always refer to as all the rejects. Like,
Yeah.
I was a
Yeah.
reject for 2 years. I wasn't allowed on Twitter because I talked about the Tuskegee experiments one too many times.
Mm.
But we need something that will appeal to the rejects, the conservatives that are not canceled, and leftists. And we have to be okay that leftists are on there, because we have to have that conversation. Because the thing that I've realized, I live out here in communist California. I try to
Mhm.
have conversations with people that I disagree with all the time. And,
Yeah.
and what's been interesting, especially over the last year or so, I've been actually able to open up a lot of people's minds and wake a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
people up to a lot of things
Yeah.
because I'm having the conversation. So if
Yeah.
you're not allowed to have the conversation on Twitter, have the one-on-one conversations with people around you,
Mhm.
and don't just shout at them. Don't just
Yeah.
yell at them. Ask them questions. Force them to think through things. Like if let's take the censorship thing. There's a lot of leftists that are like, yeah, we need to combat disinformation. Okay, so then you ask the question: who decides what's disinformation?
Yeah.
What's the First Amendment there for? Why did
Mm.
the founding fathers establish the First Amendment? Like, you start getting them to think through things, and all of a sudden they're like, oh crap, I can't just keep repeating what I'm
Yeah,
hearing on the mainstream media.
and part of it's also laziness. That it's like, yeah, you heard something. You just said the Tuskegee experiment, right?
Yeah.
All right, fine. I heard that. You could explain to me what it is, but it's part of my duty to actually go and research it, make sure it's true, and make sure it's not disinformation. Like, why should there be somebody that plays Big Brother in that process with what is actually our work? It's our work to verify these things as individuals.
Yeah. I'm actually, over the last couple of holidays, we went over to a family member's house, and I'm actually going to have him on my show. He's a prominent attorney out here in California, but he's a total lefty, right? And
Hmm.
so one of the things that we're talking about was free speech, and he was actually saying that well, the government actually has the ability to censor certain things, especially when it came to COVID, because you're dealing with a national health crisis and all this kind of
Hmm.
thing. And so it was interesting, because I started just asking him pointed questions like, well, what about this, or what about the fact that that the COVID jabs are not 95% effective, and I walked
Yeah.
him through the math about how this study that they used to cite the 95%, they actually did a study of 40,000 people, 20,000 vaxxed, 20,000 people unvaxxed, and
Hmm.
out of those 40,000 people, less than 200 people contracted COVID over the entirety
Yeah.
of their study, which means that more than 99% of people, whether you're vaxxed or unvaxxed, were not going to get COVID, according to their own study.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, they only did the study for 7 days, and then they actually eliminated either 400 or 700 people that died or had serious adverse reactions over that time. I'm like, if you're looking at that, that's not actually saying it's 95% effective at all.
Yeah.
It's actually improving statistically, it improved your protection compared to natural immunity by like 0.2%. Is that even like legitimately,
Hmm.
science to make that claim? So I was like, the fact that they were censoring people, from talking about that, is a giant massive cover up. They don't have the constitutional authority to
Hmm.
censor you, number one, and number two, all they're doing is covering up for their own crimes against humanity.
Yeah.
And so if we're not allowed to critique that or challenge that, nobody will ever hear. More people will get vaxxed, more people are going to die, more people are going to live with lifelong injuries and disabilities because they were not able to get the information that they needed about the truth about what's going on with the COVID jab. So I'm actually going to have them on the show, and we're gonna debate that. But we need more debates and more discussions where, number one, you're armed with the
Right.
truth, but number two, you're asking pointed questions and then following up with the data and the facts because you actually know this stuff inside out. And that, for me, is why I do my show, where, especially when I do the monologues, I'm trying to break this all down for
Hmm.
people to understand the facts and the data. If we're talking about COVID as well, every Thursday I do a show with Karen Kingston called In the Foxhole, and
Hmm.
we break down all the patents, we break down all the data, all the science, all the research. So in layman's terms, that way you can understand and be armed with the truth. So that way you can actually go out. We're actually training people, and Karen's actually working on the ground right now to actually get counties to declare that the COVID jabs are bioweapons, give all the money back to the federal government to,
Hmm.
basically ban it in your county. And it's actually quite effective if you're armed with the truth. So we're trying to arm as many people as we can with that.
Wow, wow, wow. Dude, that's awesome, Jeff. We're actually interviewing Karen Kingston a little bit later today.
Yeah. She texted me yesterday. She's like, you want to do a show today? And she's like, I'm going on Blood Money. I'm like, hey, I'm going on Blood Money too.
Oh, no way, no way. It's funny because we interviewed the COVID Tyranny Task Force, and I heard she works with those folks as
Yeah.
well. It's amazing. I mean, all this grassroots stuff, what you're doing, it really is inspiring, and people out there should be inspired to do what's right in this time, and really do their best to take down on a local level all these corrupt officials that got us into this mess, and really we need a sea change to save this country without a shadow of a doubt.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and it's gonna take action. It's gonna take action on the local level. It's gonna take action on the federal level, and it's important that you understand that we live in a country where a government, where it's supposed to be self government.
Hmm.
We are all a part of the government. It's not just the people in DC. It's not just the people in your state capital. They don't rule over you. They
Yeah.
answer to you. You elect them to represent you, not to tell you what to do. And if
Hmm.
they're violating the Constitution, I always say, the Constitution is the law of the land for the government. If the government does not follow the Constitution, they are in violation of the law, and you have no requirement in order to submit to unconstitutional laws, because that
Hmm.
means that they're illegal laws, right?
Hmm.
So they represent you, which means that if they're not doing their job, get rid of them, go challenge them, impeach them, recall them, run against them, get behind a candidate that can actually do the right thing, and understand you have constitutional rights that are given to you by God that cannot be taken away by the government by definition. And if the government tries to take them away from you, remember, there is no asterisk in the Constitution that says, under these circumstances, your
Yeah, yeah,
constitutional rights can be taken away. There's
yeah.
no asterisk. So since there's no asterisk, they cannot take those rights away from you.
Exactly, exactly. Jeff, is there anything that we didn't talk about that in closing you'd like to mention? Websites, the platform, network? Mike is yours.
Oh yeah, definitely. So right now, if you guys are interested in my new book coming out, it'll be out by the end of the year, called Following the Leader. You guys can pre-order that right now. All pre-orders will get signed copies. Go to jeffdornik.com, and again, that one's going to deal with the intelligence agencies, their ties with the cults, how they use that as like testing grounds for brainwashing and propaganda techniques. Like, how do you get an everyday American off the street? And I always use this example with Scientology. How do you
Mhm.
get an average American off the street who walks in for whatever their test is, and all that kind of stuff there in their Scientology center, to buy into the fact that aliens are dropping into the Pacific Ocean, climbing up the beach, and indwelling human beings, which become Scientologists. And then when you die, the alien goes back up into the sky, drops into the ocean, and climbs up on the beach and indwells another. How do you get the average American person to
Yeah.
believe that? Well, the CIA figured it out, and it's a step-by-step process. It's the exact same thing that they do with the Illuminati. It's the exact same thing that they do with Freemasonry. What they do is they start you off on level 1, then you go to level 2, level 3, level 4, and in each step, they're getting you to accept something more absurd, more absurd, into where you believe that aliens are dropping into the Pacific Ocean and climbing up on the beach. That's how they did that. That's how, now that is also how they are controlling people when it comes to COVID, when it comes to the jabs, when it comes to election fraud. They systematically get you to buy into something that is not true, and then they add something else that's not true, and then they add something else that's not true. And so the book is going to lay all of that out. You guys can pre-order that at jeffdornik.com. Also sign up for my Substack, jeffdornik.substack.com. I'm trying to put out more exposés, more information, all that kind of stuff over there. So those are the two things I'd say.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It sounds like an amazing book. We will definitely be ordering that book. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on to the Blood Money podcast. We really appreciate your time. This was really enlightening, especially, like I said, the churches, what's happening with the invasion of politics into the church. And hopefully all this work that we're doing really transcends these issues and helps us lead to some serious change.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for always getting the truth out there and following the truth wherever it is, because we need more people that are willing to do that and that aren't selling out to the highest bidder, which is what a lot of people do. So I really appreciate you.
Exactly. For the viewers out there, thank you so much for showing up to this episode of Blood Money. Please check out americahappens.com, where we have all of our latest Blood Money episodes posted, including our other shows like Gloves Off with Joey Gilbert, Gianna Michelli's The State National University, Mindy Robinson's Conspiracy Truths. She just dropped an amazing episode that is actually on fire for this last week. It's been getting tens of thousands of views. I highly recommend that you check it out. And also, please check out our latest episode of the America Happens documentary series about the persecution of Tina Peters. Thank you so much for showing up this episode of Blood Money, and I will see you on the next episode.